painting friends, it's Stoof here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I was inspired by the fall season and we are going to do this painting tutorial. I recently had my baby shower and I set up this little photo booth area with fall decor. So I took a picture of that and then I used that for reference for this painting. I spent about 3 hours on this 9 by 12 inch acrylic painting, so this is not going to be a real-time painting tutorial. However, I am going to walk you through the process and I am going to show you a screenshot of the sketch of this concept if you would like to trace that sketch out and then just fill in the colors along with me as I'm doing the tutorial. Alright, so to get started on this tutorial, all you're going to need is the color brown on your palette, or blue. I would just pick a color that's darker, but you only need one color on there for now because we're just going to sketch out the concept. You also need a cup of water, a smaller paintbrush like a number 2 flat tip brush or something like that, and some paper towels. To sketch out the concept, I had this reference photo on my computer. I put a quick little grid on my 9 by 12 inch canvas panel, and the grid was spaced out every 3 inches. So I had a little tick mark every 3 inches on my canvas panel matching up to the 3-inch space grid on my reference photo. And I just quickly sketched in the features from the outline of each object onto the canvas panel without filling anything in yet. Here's a screenshot of that outline sketch that I did if you want to follow along by just kind of copying that sketch and then filling in the colors as I do. Remember, if you do recreate this painting, this is for you to do as a hobby just for fun. Please do not try to sell a copy of one of my paintings. So the next step, once you have your concept sketched out on your canvas panel, is to get all of those colors on your paint palette to start adding the colors into the painting. I have a list of the paint colors in the description under this video, but the colors that you'll need are burnt sienna, orange, titanium white, portrait pink, yellow oxide, cadmium yellow medium, cadmium red light, yellow light Hansa, alizarin crimson, magenta, raw umber, burnt umber, olive green, emerald green, ultramarine blue, light ultramarine blue, and Mars black. As you can see, I used quite a range of colors here. That helps to give a lot more depth to the painting, especially when you're using acrylic paint. So based on all of these colors that I'm using, I'm not going to recommend this for beginner acrylic painters. If you are a beginner, I would shrink that color list down to about 7 different colors so that you have one red, one yellow, one blue, one green, one purple, a white, and a black. That'll cover your basics for you, but you're not going to get that same range of depth that I have in my finished painting. As I start blocking in color to the painting, I'm mixing in emerald green, ultramarine blue, maybe a bit of sap green and a bit of black there to get a neutral, not super saturated for the leaves under those yellow mums in the background. And I'm just filling in all of the space around each mum. You don't want to cover up where the mums are going to go because this nice yellow paint where we're going to put the mums later is translucent. So anywhere that you have that dark green, it's going to overlap not very nicely. All right, after you get the space filled in around the flowers on those mums in the back upper right, the next section you're going to do is that green around the mums in the lower right, and then also use some greens and blues for the upper left back corner and that little section under that back pumpkin. You can use a variety of your greens here. I mixed in more blues and emerald green, maybe a little bit of magenta into some of my greens, just so they're not all the exact same green, and that helps to give you more depth to your painting as well. After getting those little greens filled in, I started to add the brown centers of the sunflowers. and I put in like a burnt umber base there with a little bit of blue and magenta mixed in as well. And once I filled in a base spot there, I took the brush and just did some little dabs of paint that kind of brushed away some of the thickness of the paint, leaving what looks like little seeds in the center of that sunflower area. Next, I moved on to the stems of the pumpkins, going with more of a blue-gray color for these pumpkin stems. I know a lot of people think pumpkin stems should be just brown or burnt umber, but in this situation, these pumpkins were looking more blue and gray and purple in the stem area. After working on the pumpkin stems, next I moved to the leaves around the sunflowers, mixing that olive green or sap green with emerald green and a little ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of burnt umber as well, starting with a darker shade of that green in the shadowy part under each sunflower petal or the shadowy part below another leaf, and then using more emerald green and white for the highlight at the tip of each leaf where it's catching the most light. And this is helping to show that these leaves are layering over one another in the areas around the sunflowers. Next, I started to fill in those yellow mums in the background now that the green leaf area is dry. And I just went with yellow Hansa as a base color there, mixing in a tiny bit of white, maybe a tiny bit of that portrait pink color, just so it's not all exactly the same. Just filling in that base color for now. Next, moving to the orange rusty colored mums on the right side in the middle ground. And for this, I was mixing in some yellow oxide, some burnt sienna, some cadmium red light, a little bit of that orange, and some burnt umber. So using all of those warmer tones to just fill in a base for those. The mums closest to the viewer are a little bit in shadow, so I mixed in a little bit more brown in those mums just to take the saturation down and take the value down just a bit as well. Next, I moved to that pumpkin on the lower left foreground. And for that pumpkin, there's a lot going on with the colors in this pumpkin. So to give your pumpkin dimension, making it look more 3D, it helps to get those little grooves that are coming out from the central part of the pumpkin. But you also have a variety of color in your pumpkin. So the base of that pumpkin that we see on the canvas here has more warm brown. So you can mix some burnt sienna in there. There's also like a more yellow type of color in there as well. And then you get more of the warm, lighter values in that central part of the pumpkin. And then it gets a little bit darker again as you get closer to the stem. So you can see where light is hitting that pumpkin. Because it is a smooth surface, it does reflect a little bit of other colors in there. So I'll use some portrait pink in there. I'll use a little bit of light blue for some of my shadows and highlights just to get a little bit more range and color on that pumpkin. And you'll see me go back to that pumpkin a lot, but for getting started, I just wanted to get the values right and show where I wanted to have the little grooves in each part of the pumpkin. Next, I moved to the pumpkin on the lower right foreground. And again, for the parts in shadow, we're mixing in more brown, maybe a little bit of cool red, so an Alizarin Crimson there. And then the part closer to the stem is going to be a little bit more yellow-orange, catching more of the light in that area. And don't forget to add in your grooves as well. I'm using my 1/4-inch flat tip brush for this, and it's working pretty well. You can also use a liner brush if you want to get it a little bit more detailed just right from the start. I do go back with a liner brush later to touch up the details and get some of those grooves having a bit deeper of a shadow. So I'm playing around with the values a bit with the pumpkins. That pumpkin in the back left, I just filled in a base color for that, and then I start to add some highlights where it's catching a little bit more light, mixing in that portrait pink and white to get that highlight. As I mentioned, it has that smooth surface, so it's really catching different colors on the highlights. My next step is to fill in the petals around the sunflowers there using just yellow light Hansa with a bit of cadmium yellow medium for the base, just filling in the shapes for all of those petals. I'm going to focus on this sunflower here and then repeat these exact same steps for the other sunflowers. So I'm going to talk more thoroughly about this one, and then it's going to be a pretty similar process for the other sunflowers. So I started with that lighter base color, then starting closer to the center, I mixed in a bit more cadmium yellow medium and a little bit of burnt sienna, maybe a little bit of raw umber, and started to take the liner brush and create some little dash lines, kind of pulling out from the center, using a little bit more of those warmer tones closer to the center and pulling away from the center. After that, I started to outline each petal with raw umber and a little bit of that yellow mixture as well, just getting those sharper edges for each petal. Next, I created a set of small little petals surrounding that central seed part of the sunflower using that raw umber mix. There's also a little bit of burnt sienna mixed in there as well. I'm still using my liner brush that's helping me to get these more detailed little intricate lines. And we're, again, keeping things warmer towards the center. Next, I'm adding highlights to each petal on the outside petals, the big petals, by mixing white with yellow Hansa light and a little bit of cadmium yellow medium. But adding that white mixed in there really brightens things up and shows a little bit more depth with the petals. And then I just repeat that same process on the other two sunflowers in the foreground, middle ground area, keeping things warmer in the central part right around the seed area and adding those highlights and outlines around petals on the outer edges, just to define those shapes a little bit more. Next, I took my yellow oxide with a little bit of orange and started to fill in little central parts on the mums on the right side of the canvas. Those little central parts are lighter than the other parts of the mum. And I did a couple little dabs of paint with that liner brush to show some highlights where the mums are there as well, using that same kind of color. And then I go back in with more crimson and burnt sienna to build up some shadows where the shadows are in front of that central part of the flower in some areas. And as you can see on those mums there, the shape is more round at the mums closer to us, and the shape is more ovally at the top of each of those mums, and that helps to show the shape of the mums. Next, I move over to the magenta flowers in the central part, just blocking in that base magenta with a little bit of black, just getting that base color in there first. I also add in the base color for each of the leaves that I'm starting to block in. I'm really just filling in the rest of the canvas, trying to cover up that white space now. After doing that, I start to add some highlights and shadows to build the contrast up on those magenta flowers in the central part of the painting. Taking more of my deeper greens, filling in some more shadows to get the contrast built up on those greens as well in the leaves. I'm working on the fall leaves. They're like maple leaves. Here, working on getting a little bit of variety in the colors of those leaves, mixing in more browns with the greens, because these are not super saturated green, because it's not like a spring green, right? We're going for like a fall green. So I'm mixing more raw umber and yellow oxide in with that olive green for the green leaves. Next, I'm moving back over to those mums, adding some highlights. The highlights to those mums are white with yellow Hansa light, so super bright, and on the cooler side of yellow. We want those to be more cool than the sunflower petals. Next, I'm just touching up some of those little leaves in between the mums just to get that shape a bit more defined. Using my liner brush, and I'm going back to the pumpkin stems, touching those up a bit more, boosting the highlights on those, starting to add little stems where the leaves are connected to each other, and adding more highlights and variation in color to each leaf, starting to add the veins in the leaves, using darker browns, Alizarin Crimsons, mixes of greens as well. And continuing to go around with my number 2 flat tip brush, getting more of those little details in, boosting some of the contrast, making some of those shadows deeper, just to give a bit more variety and depth to this painting. Working my way all around the canvas, just seeing what catches my eye and what needs to be adjusted at this point. Touching up some highlights and some of those flower petals, boosting the contrast even more, trying to boost the saturation a little bit more in some of these pumpkins to draw your eye to them. Also adding a bit more variation in color to these different features. I had in mind to create this painting for print reproduction as a puzzle. So I want to add a lot more variation than what I saw in my reference photograph, so that when this becomes a puzzle, it's a bit less complicated and a little bit easier to see where things should go. A frustrating thing whenever you get a puzzle is when it's all the same color and you're like, where does this piece go? I don't know what corner it goes in or what section of the puzzle this should go into because everything looks the same. So I'm trying to have a lot of variety in this painting so that when I upload it for print and puzzle orders, it is a fun puzzle to do. So after doing that, taking one final look at the painting after stepping away, I added my signature and the painting is complete. Alright guys, that wraps up our painting tutorial for today. I hope you enjoyed this one. Have a wonderful fall season. If you're not subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future painting tutorials like this one. Have a wonderful day and happy painting! Bye-bye!